The training arena on Kepler 9 station smelled like sweat and ozone. Commander Vexithar stood in the center of the massive room, his silver scales catching the artificial light. He had 4 arms, each one capable of crushing steel, and his reputation across the galaxy was built on turning wild cadets into perfect soldiers. Today, he faced 6 young Vulcans, and his confidence was already cracking. The Vulcans were wolf-like creatures from a warrior planet on the far edge of the Andromeda sector. These 6 cubs stood as tall as grown humans, covered in thick fur that ranged from gray to black. Their eyes glowed amber in the dim light, and their teeth were sharp enough to tear through armor. They had been sent here after destroying 3 training facilities on their homeworld. Nobody wanted them, but Commander Vexithar had never failed a training assignment in his 30 years of service. "Form a line!" Vexithar's voice boomed across the arena, loud enough to make the walls vibrate. The cubs looked at him, then at each other. The largest one, Caro, threw his head back and made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a howl. The others joined in, their voices echoing through the space. None of them moved to form a line. Lieutenant Jake Morrison watched from the observation deck above the arena. He was leaning against the glass wall, his arms crossed over his chest. Jake was 28 years old, average height for a human, with brown hair cut short for military regulation. He had been assigned to Kepler 9 6 months ago as an assistant combat trainer. Though most species here treated him like a curiosity rather than a real instructor, humans were new to the galactic community, barely 3 decades since their first faster-than-light ship had left Earth's solar system. "They're not even trying," said Instructor Korvax, a massive Gorath standing next to Jake. Korvax's skin looked like gray stone, and he stood nearly 8 feet tall. "Vexthar is losing control." Jake didn't respond. He kept watching the cubs, noticing how they moved around each other. There was a pattern to their chaos, a structure that most people would miss. Down in the arena, Commander Vexthar tried again. "You will obey, or you will be sent back to your homeworld in disgrace." Caro, the alpha of the group, walked right up to the commander. The cub was young, maybe equivalent to a 15-year-old human, but he showed no fear. He sniffed at Vexithar's uniform, then turned around and walked away. The other cubs followed him to the far corner of the arena, where they started wrestling with each other. Vexithar's scales darkened with anger. He marched over to the cubs and reached out with 2 of his 4 arms to grab Caro and pull him back. The moment he touched the young Vulcan, all 6 cubs turned on him. They didn't attack, not really, but they formed a tight circle around their alpha and growled in unison. The sound was deep and threatening, a clear warning. The commander stepped back. He had faced down pirates and war criminals, but something about the unified front of these cubs made him hesitate. They weren't just being difficult. They were showing him that he had no authority over them. For the next hour, Vexthar tried everything he knew. He offered rewards, treats imported from the Vulcan homeworld. The cubs took them and went back to ignoring him. He demonstrated combat techniques, showing off his skills. They watched with mild interest, then returned to their own games. He raised his voice, lowered his voice, used firm commands, and tried gentle encouragement. Nothing worked. Other instructors took their turns over the following days. Korvax, the Gorath, tried to use his physical size to intimidate them. The cubs treated him like a climbing structure, jumping on his back until he had to shake them off. Instructor Sylvie, a Serene with blue skin and telepathic abilities, attempted to connect with their minds. The cubs somehow blocked her out, their pack bond creating a mental wall she couldn't penetrate. Even Instructor Drax, a Threxian known for his ability to mentally dominate other species, failed. The cub simply sat down and went to sleep when he tried to use his powers. Jake watched every session from the observation deck. He took notes on a small data pad, writing down everything he saw, the way Caro always ate first. How Luna, the smallest female, seemed to notice things before the others did. The way Fenris, the dark-furred male, constantly challenged Karo's position. Gray and Storm, two middle-ranked cubs, always stayed close to each other, and Shiva, the sleek female with silver-tipped fur, acted as a mediator when fights got too rough. "They're going to be sent back," Korvac said on the 5th day. He had joined Jake in the observation deck again, both of them watching Vexthar's latest failed attempt. "The Vulcan government will cut ties with the Academy. This is a disaster." "Maybe," Jake said quietly. "You think you could do better, human?" Korvac's tone wasn't mocking, just curious. Jake didn't answer right away. He kept watching Luna, who had stopped playing and was staring up at the observation deck. Her amber eyes seemed to lock onto Jake's position, even though the glass was supposed to be one way. She tilted her head, studying him. "I don't know," Jake finally said, "but I think everyone is approaching this wrong." "What do you mean?" "Look at how they move together," Jake pointed at the cubs. "They're not being random. They have a hierarchy, a structure. Karo is the alpha, but Luna is the observer. Fenris is the challenger. The others have roles too. They're not disobeying because they're bad. They're disobeying because nobody has given them a reason to follow." Korvac grunted. "Vexthar is a decorated commander. If he cannot lead them, who can?" Jake watched as Shiva accidentally bumped into Luna too hard during play. Immediately, all the other cubs stopped and gathered around Luna, making soft, whining sounds. Luna licked Shiva's muzzle, accepting the apology, and just like that, the pack tension dissolved. "They respond to each other," Jake said, more to himself than to Korvac. "They respond to pack behavior." That evening, Jake went to Commander Vexthar's office. The Krylonian was sitting behind a desk made for someone with 4 arms, reviewing reports on multiple screens at once. He looked tired, his scales duller than usual. "Lieutenant Morrison," Vexthar said without looking up. "If you're here to tell me I'm failing, I already know. I'm here to ask for a chance, sir." That got Vexthar's attention. All 4 of his eyes focused on Jake. "A chance to do what?" "To try training them. 1 session, just me and the cubs." Vexthar leaned back in his chair. "You, a human? We have tried the strongest warriors, the most skilled telepaths, the most experienced commanders in the galaxy. What makes you think you can succeed where they have failed?" Jake met his gaze steadily. "Because I understand pack animals, sir. Humans lived with wolves for thousands of years on Earth. We learned how they think, how they bond, how they choose leaders. These cubs aren't looking for the strongest or the loudest. They're looking for something else. And what is that? Someone who understands what they need, not what we think they should need." Vexthar was silent for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. "Tomorrow morning. 1 session. If you fail, we send them home and the Academy loses the Vulcan contract. If you succeed..." He paused. "If you succeed, you'll have done something nobody else in the galaxy could do." Jake nodded and left the office. As he walked down the corridor toward his quarters, he passed a viewing window that looked down into the cubs' habitat. They were settling down for sleep, curled up together in a pile of fur and contentment. Luna's head came up, and once again she seemed to look right at him. Her ears perked forward with interest. Jake put his hand on the glass, and Luna stood up slowly, walking over to the window. She placed her paw on the glass opposite his hand. For a moment, human and Vulcan stayed like that, separated by transparent metal but somehow connected. "Tomorrow," Jake whispered. "We'll see if this works." Luna's tail wagged once. Then she turned and went back to her pack. Jake went to his quarters to prepare for the most important training session of his life. Jake spent the night in the Academy's library, accessing every file about Vulcans that Earth's database had recorded. There wasn't much. The Vulcans had only joined the galactic community 40 years ago, and they kept to themselves mostly. They were warriors, hunters, and they lived in strict pack hierarchies. But the files didn't tell him what he really needed to know. They didn't explain how a pack chose its leader or what made a Vulcan respect authority. He switched to Earth's historical records instead. Wolves, dogs, thousands of years of human interaction with pack animals. Jake had grown up in Montana, spending summers with his grandfather who worked in wildlife conservation. He'd watched wolf packs in Yellowstone, studied their behavior, learned their body language. Back then, he never imagined that knowledge would matter in space. Wolves didn't follow the strongest or the loudest. They followed the most confident, the one who made them feel safe. An alpha wasn't a tyrant. An alpha was a leader who ate last, who protected the pack, who made decisions calmly, even in danger. Humans had learned to mimic that behavior over thousands of years, which was why dogs had bonded with people instead of remaining wild. Maybe Vulcans weren't so different from Earth's wolves. Jake arrived at the training arena early the next morning. The observation deck was already full. Word had spread through the station that the human was going to attempt training the cubs. Most species had come to watch what they assumed would be an entertaining failure. Jake could hear them talking through the glass above. "The human is brave. I will give him that," someone said. "Brave or stupid," another voice replied. "Those cubs will tear him apart." Commander Vexthar entered the arena from a side door. His scales looked polished, his uniform crisp. He wanted to project confidence even though Jake could see the doubt in his eyes. "Lieutenant Morrison," Vexthar said formally, "you understand the conditions. 1 session. You will be alone with the cubs for 1 hour. If you succeed in gaining their obedience, you will continue as their primary trainer. If you fail, they return home tomorrow." "I understand, sir. I should also inform you that the Vulcan ambassador is watching from the diplomatic gallery. Whatever happens here will affect relations between your species and theirs." Jake felt his heart beat faster, but he kept his expression calm. "Understood." Vexithar studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "The cubs will be released in 1 minute. May fortune favor you, human." The commander left through the same door he'd entered. Jake was alone in the center of the arena. The space was huge, designed for combat training. The floor was made of some material that could withstand plasma fire. The walls were reinforced steel. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. Jake took a deep breath and rolled his shoulders, loosening the tension. He thought about his grandfather's words from years ago, watching a pack of wolves in the distance. They can smell fear, Jake. Not just with their noses, but in how you move, how you stand. If you're scared, they know. If you're calm, they feel it. That's the secret. The gate on the far side of the arena opened with a metallic clang. 6 Vulcan cubs bounded into the space, their claws clicking on the floor. They saw Jake immediately and stopped, forming a loose semicircle. Caro was in the front, his amber eyes locked on the human. Luna was to his left, her head tilted in that curious way Jake had noticed before. Fenris flanked the right, his darker fur making him look like a shadow. The others spread out behind them. The observation deck went silent. Jake didn't shout a command. He didn't move aggressively. He simply stood there, relaxed, his arms at his sides. He looked at each cub briefly, making eye contact but not staring them down. That was important. A stare was a challenge. Brief eye contact was acknowledgement. Caro took a step forward, testing. His hackles raised slightly, not in aggression but in evaluation. Who was this human? Why was he alone? Why wasn't he shouting like all the others? Jake turned his body slightly to the side, not facing Caro directly. In wolf behavior, a direct frontal stance was confrontational. A side stance said, "I see you, but I'm not challenging you." It was a subtle thing, but crucial. The cubs exchanged glances. This was different. Every other instructor had either tried to dominate them immediately or shown fear. This human showed neither. He was just there, calm and present. Jake started walking slowly around the perimeter of the arena. He wasn't walking away from them, but he wasn't approaching either. He moved with purpose, like he had somewhere to be. The cubs watched, then started following him. It was instinctive for them. Pack animals followed movement. Luna broke from the group first, trotting alongside Jake about 10 feet away. Her nose worked constantly, taking in his scent. Jake didn't look at her directly, but he was aware of every movement she made. Gray and Storm followed next, their curiosity overcoming their wariness. Shiva came after, moving with that graceful way she had. Fenris held back with Caro, both of them still evaluating. Jake completed one circle of the arena and stopped in the center. The cubs formed a loose ring around him, closer now than before. He could hear them breathing, could smell their wild scent. His heart was pounding, but he kept his breathing steady and slow. Then he did something that made the entire observation deck gasp. He sat down on the floor. In the language of pack animals, sitting made himself smaller, less threatening. It was a sign of confidence, not weakness. A fearful creature wouldn't make itself vulnerable. Caro's ears perked forward in surprise. Fenris took a step closer, sniffing the air. Jake pulled out a water container from his belt and took a drink. He moved slowly, deliberately, like he had all the time in the world. Like 6 predatory aliens weren't circling him. He recapped the container and set it on the ground next to him. Luna moved first. She walked right up to Jake, close enough that he could have reached out and touched her. She sniffed his shoulder, his face, his hair. Jake remained still, letting her investigate. After a moment, Luna sat down 3 feet away from him. That broke the tension. Gray and Storm approached together, sniffing at Jake's boots. Shiva walked around behind him, checking him from all angles. Even Fenris finally came closer, though he maintained a wary distance. Caro was the last. The alpha had to make sure his pack was safe before he committed. He walked up to Jake and stared directly into his eyes. This was the moment. If Jake showed weakness or fear, Caro would dismiss him like all the others. If Jake tried to dominate, Caro would fight. Jake looked back at Caro calmly. Not challenging, not submitting, just being present. After what felt like an hour but was probably only 30 seconds, Caro huffed out a breath and sat down. Jake started talking. His voice was low and calm, barely above a conversational level. "I know you don't understand most of my words," he said, "but you understand tone. You understand intent. On my planet, we have creatures like you, wolves. They're smart and strong and loyal. Humans learned to live with them thousands of years ago. We hunted together. We protected each other. We became family." The cubs listened. Their ears were perked forward, focused on his voice. Maybe they didn't understand the words, but they understood that he was communicating with them, not commanding them. "You're far from home," Jake continued. "You're in a strange place with strange species who don't understand you. They think you're being bad, but you're not. You're just looking for a leader who gets it, someone who sees you for what you are, not what they want you to be." Luna lay down completely, her head resting on her paws. Storm yawned, showing all his teeth, then lay down next to his companion Gray. Shiva settled into a relaxed position. Even Fenris, the challenger, seemed to lose some of his tension. "Here's what I know about packs," Jake said. "You need structure. You need to know your place, but you also need to trust your leader. Trust isn't demanded, it's earned. So here's my promise to you. I won't treat you like soldiers to break. I'll treat you like warriors to guide. I'll earn your trust, and in return, you'll show me what you can really do." Jake slowly stood up. The cubs watched but didn't tense. He took 3 steps forward, and without being told, the cubs shifted to track his movement. It was subtle, but it was there. They were already beginning to follow. "Let me show you something," Jake said. He moved into a basic combat stance, one taught to all Academy cadets. It was a simple defensive position, feet shoulder-width apart, hands ready. He held it for 5 seconds, then relaxed and moved to a different stance. Luna stood up and mimicked the first stance. Her form was imperfect, but she was trying. Jake nodded at her, a small gesture of approval. Luna's tail wagged once. Gray tried the second stance, his larger body making it look different, but still recognizable. Storm copied his companion. Shiva watched for a moment, then joined in, her movements more graceful than the others. Caro stood and moved into the first stance. His form was nearly perfect, his natural warrior instincts guiding him. Fenris, not wanting to be outdone by his alpha rival, performed the second stance with aggressive precision. Jake spent the next 20 minutes leading them through basic movements, not drilling them, not commanding them, but showing them and letting them choose to follow. When Fenris started to break formation to challenge Caro, Jake simply walked between them. He didn't push them apart. He just stood there, tall and calm. The training arena buzzed with whispered conversations from the observation deck. Instructors from a dozen different species watched the human work with the Vulcan cubs, and none of them could quite believe what they were seeing. The cubs were following Jake Morrison's lead, mimicking his movements, paying attention to his demonstrations. It wasn't perfect obedience, but it was more than anyone else had achieved. Commander Vexthar stood in the center of the observation deck, his 4 arms crossed over his chest. Next to him, the Vulcan ambassador, a massive gray-furred warrior named Krell, watched with intense focus. Krell had fought in 3 wars and commanded entire fleets. He had sent these cubs to Kepler 9 as a last resort, expecting them to fail and return home in disgrace. Now he wasn't sure what he was seeing. "The human has a strange method," Krell said in his deep, growling voice. "He has them engaged," Vexthar replied. "That's more than any of us accomplished." "Engaged is not the same as obedient. My people do not need engagement. They need discipline." Vexithar didn't respond. He kept watching Jake, trying to understand what the human was doing differently. There was something in the way Jake moved, the way he held himself. Not aggressive, not submissive, just present and calm. It reminded Vexithar of the ancient meditation masters of his own species, the ones who could stand in the middle of a storm without flinching. Down in the arena, Jake had moved on to more complex movements. He demonstrated a defensive role, tucking his body and coming up ready. The cubs watched with interest. Luna tried it first, her smaller size making the role easier. She came up smoothly and looked to Jake for approval. He nodded, and her tail wagged. Storm attempted the roll but misjudged the momentum, ending up on his back with his legs in the air. The other cubs made sounds that were definitely laughing. Storm's ears flattened in embarrassment. Jake walked over and knelt beside him, not touching, just present. He demonstrated the roll again, slower this time, showing how to tuck the shoulder and use the momentum. Storm watched carefully, then tried again. This time he completed it successfully. Jake smiled and nodded. That moment of patient correction changed something. The cubs realized that failure wasn't going to be met with punishment or mockery from this human. It was just part of learning. Shiva tried the roll next, then Gray, then Fenris. Even Caro, the proud alpha, attempted it. His first try was clumsy, and he glanced at Jake as if daring him to comment. Jake simply showed him the adjustment needed, treating the alpha with the same respect he'd shown the others. Jake checked the time display on the wall. He'd been in the arena for 40 minutes, 20 minutes left. He decided to push further. "All right," he said, his voice still calm and low. "Let's try something harder." He moved to the weapons rack on the side of the arena. There were training staffs there made of a lightweight composite that could take a beating but wouldn't cause serious injury. Jake selected one and returned to the center of the arena. The cubs watched with renewed interest. Weapons meant combat, and combat was what Vulcans lived for. Jake demonstrated a basic staff form, spinning the weapon in controlled movements, striking at imaginary opponents. The cubs were mesmerized. This wasn't just movement. This was the dance of battle, and it spoke to something deep in their warrior nature. When Jake finished, he planted the staff in the ground and stepped back. The invitation was clear. Who wanted to try? Fenris jumped forward immediately, grabbing a staff from the rack. He was the challenger. Always eager to prove himself, he swung the staff wildly, trying to show his strength. The weapon whooshed through the air with impressive force but no control. Jake didn't criticize. He simply picked up his staff again and demonstrated the first move slowly. A simple overhead block. Fenris watched and tried to copy it, his movement still too aggressive but beginning to show form. Jake worked with him for 2 minutes, and gradually Fenris's swings became more controlled. Luna was next. She approached the weapons rack carefully and selected the lightest staff. Her movements with it were cautious, precise. She mimicked Jake's demonstration exactly, her intelligence showing in how quickly she learned. Jake spent less time with her because she needed less correction. One by one, the cubs tried the staff forms. Jake gave each of them individual attention, adapting his teaching to their personalities. He was firm with Caro, respectful of the Alpha's pride. He was patient with Storm, who needed more time to understand the movements. He was encouraging with Gray, who lacked confidence. He channeled Shiva's grace into fluid strikes. The observation deck had gone completely silent. Every instructor was watching the impossible happen. The Vulcan cubs, the ones who had destroyed 3 training facilities and defied every authority figure, were learning. They were trying. They were responding to feedback. "How is he doing this?" Instructor Sylvie, the Cyrene telepath, whispered to Korvax. "I don't know," the massive Gorath replied. "He's not stronger than them. He's not using telepathy. He's not even commanding them with authority. He's just showing them, and they're choosing to follow." "It's respect," said a voice behind them. They turned to see an older human, Captain Helen Brooks, the senior human officer on the station. She'd been on Earth during the early days of the space program. "Jake is giving them what they need, not what he thinks they should need. He's treating them like intelligent beings worthy of respect, not problems to be solved." "But how did he know to do this?" Sylvie asked. Helen smiled. "Humans have been doing this for 10,000 years. We took wolves, wild predators, and we made them into partners. We didn't break them. We understood them. That knowledge is in every human who's ever lived with a dog. Jake is just applying it here." In the arena, Jake was approaching the final test. He needed to see if the cubs would follow an actual command, not just imitate his actions. This was the moment that would determine if the session was truly successful. He gathered the cubs in front of him. They stood in a rough semicircle, their attention on him. Jake held his staff across his body in both hands and looked at each cub in turn. "I'm going to ask something of you now," he said quietly. "Not because I'm stronger or because I'm in charge, because I'm asking as someone who respects you. Can you show me that respect in return?" The cubs didn't understand all the words, but they understood the tone. Luna tilted her head, listening intently. Caro's ears were perked forward. The others waited. Jake took 3 steps backward and planted his staff in the ground. Then he held up one hand, palm out toward the cubs. It was a universal gesture. Stop, wait, hold. And then he spoke one word, barely above a whisper. "Stay." For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. The cubs stood there looking at Jake, looking at each other. Fenris shifted his weight, about to move forward. Storm glanced at Gray, uncertain. Caro's muscles tensed. Jake didn't repeat the command. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there with his hand up, his eyes calm and confident, radiating the certainty that they would listen. Luna sat down first. The moment she did, Gray and Storm followed. Shiva lowered herself to the ground gracefully. That left Fenris and Caro standing. Fenris looked at his alpha, waiting to see what Caro would do. The young alpha was in an impossible position. Every instinct told him to challenge, to test, to push boundaries. But something else, something deeper, recognized that this human was different. This human had shown him respect, had taught him without domination, had treated the pack as worthy. Caro sat down. The moment he did, Fenris immediately followed. All 6 cubs were sitting, watching Jake, waiting, obeying not out of fear, but out of choice. The observation deck erupted. Species that had never agreed on anything were suddenly shouting in excitement. Instructors who had failed with these cubs for days were witnessing a human succeed in under an hour. The impossible had become real. Ambassador Krell's eyes were wide. His ears were flat against his head in shock. "That human," he said slowly, "just gave a command that 6 Vulcan cubs followed. Do you understand what this means, Commander?" Vexthar did understand. In Vulcan culture, pack bonds were sacred. These cubs had just acknowledged Jake Morrison as pack, not as owner, not as master, but as alpha, as leader. Jake held the position for 30 seconds, his hand still raised, the cubs still sitting and watching him. He could hear the commotion from the observation deck above, but he didn't let it distract him. This moment was too important. These cubs had given him something precious, their trust. He couldn't break it now. Slowly, deliberately, Jake lowered his hand. The cubs remained sitting. He took one step forward, then another. Luna's ears tracked his movement, but she didn't stand. Caro's eyes followed Jake, but the alpha stayed in place. They were waiting for permission. Jake smiled and spoke the release word from Earth's dog training. Okay. The cubs understood. They jumped up, and suddenly all of them were moving toward Jake at once. For a second, panic flashed through the observation deck as it looked like the cubs might attack. But they didn't. They circled around Jake, tails wagging, making soft sounds that were almost like purring. Luna pressed her shoulder against Jake's leg. Storm bumped his head against Jake's hand, asking for a pat. Even Caro approached and touched his nose to Jake's shoulder, a gesture of acceptance. Jake had done it. In 1 hour, he had achieved what every other instructor had failed to do in days. He had earned the respect of 6 Vulcan cubs. The arena door opened and Commander Vexthar entered, followed by Ambassador Krell. The cubs immediately formed a protective circle around Jake, their posture shifting to alert. They didn't growl or threaten, but their message was clear. This human was their pack now. "Stand down," Jake said quietly. The cubs relaxed but stayed close to him. Vexithar approached slowly, his 4 arms spread to show he meant no threat. "Lieutenant Morrison, that was the most remarkable display I've witnessed in 3 decades of training. How did you do it?" "I didn't do anything special, sir," Jake replied. "I just treated them the way they needed to be treated, with respect and understanding." Ambassador Krell stepped forward. He was even larger than the cubs, his gray fur streaked with white from age and battle scars. His presence radiated authority. The cubs tensed again, but Jake placed a calming hand on Luna's head. "Human," Krell said in his deep voice, "you have accomplished what no Vulcan instructor could do with these cubs. They are the children of warriors from strong bloodlines, but they have been trouble since birth, wild, uncontrollable. I sent them here expecting them to fail and return home, where they would be assigned to labor duties instead of the warrior path. You have changed that outcome." "They're not wild, Ambassador," Jake said respectfully. "They're just young. They needed someone who understood pack dynamics. And you understand this because of your Earth wolves?" "Yes, sir. Humans and wolves evolved together on my planet. We learned each other's languages, each other's ways. That knowledge has been passed down through thousands of generations. It's part of who we are." Krell studied Jake for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the arena. He lowered his head slightly. A gesture of respect from a Vulcan warrior to an equal. You have given these cubs a chance at honor. For that, you have my gratitude and the gratitude of their families. The next few days transformed life at Kepler 9 Academy. Jake was officially assigned as the primary trainer for the Vulcan Cubs, with other instructors assisting for specialized combat techniques. But the real teaching came from Jake's methods. He structured the training around pack behavior. Every morning started with pack time, where the Cubs could interact with each other naturally for 30 minutes. Then came training, but Jake broke it into short sessions with breaks, understanding that young minds needed rest to learn properly. He used positive reinforcement constantly, praising effort and improvement rather than just success. The Cubs blossomed under this approach. Luna, the observer, showed incredible tactical intelligence. Jake started teaching her strategy and planning, and she absorbed it like a sponge. Caro, the alpha, proved to be a natural leader once he had structure to work within. Jake taught him how to lead by example rather than aggression. Fenris, the challenger, had enormous energy that had been seen as a problem. Jake channeled it into advanced combat training, giving Fenris difficult challenges that burned off his excess energy while teaching him discipline. Gray and Storm, the middle pack members, excelled at teamwork. Jake paired them for exercises that required coordination. Shiva, with her grace and mediation skills, learned diplomatic tactics alongside combat training. Other instructors started asking Jake for advice. Species from across the galaxy suddenly wanted to understand how humans could connect with pack animals so effectively. Jake found himself teaching not just the Cubs, but his fellow instructors. The key, he explained to a group of instructors in the mess hall, is understanding that obedience isn't the goal. Partnership is. When you demand obedience through fear or force, you get soldiers who follow orders but don't think. When you earn respect and build trust, you get warriors who follow because they believe in the mission and the leader. Korvax, the massive Gorath, nodded slowly. My species builds obedience through strength. The strongest leads. But I have watched you with the Cubs. You are not the strongest in that arena, yet they follow you without question. That's because strength isn't just physical, Jake said. It's also emotional, mental. The Cubs know I won't let them down. They trust that I'll keep them safe while pushing them to be better. That's real strength. The turning point came 2 weeks into training. The Academy held regular combat simulations, where cadets from different species competed in team exercises. It was meant to build cooperation and test skills in realistic scenarios. The Vulcan Cubs had never participated before because they couldn't be trusted to follow commands or work with other species. Jake decided they were ready. The simulation was set in a mock urban environment, full of obstacles and hiding places. 2 teams of 6 would compete to capture objectives while avoiding simulated enemy fire. The Cubs would face a team of experienced cadets from 3 different species, 2 Kralthians, known for their speed, 2 Gorath, known for their strength, and 2 Threxians, known for their tactical minds. In the ready room before the simulation, Jake gathered the Cubs. They were excited, their tails wagging, their eyes bright. This was what they'd been training for, real combat, even if simulated. Listen to me, Jake said, his voice calm and serious. Out there, you represent more than yourselves. You represent your species. You represent everything we've worked for, but most importantly, you represent each other. You're a pack. That's your greatest strength. Caro stepped forward, his posture confident. We fight as one, he said in heavily accented but understandable human English. The Cubs had been learning the language during their free time, wanting to communicate better with their pack leader. Yes, Jake said, surprised and pleased. You fight as one. Luna, what's our strategy? Luna had been studying the simulation maps. Split into 2 groups. Caro leads Fenris and Storm to the main objective. I lead Gray and Shiva to the secondary. We communicate using the pack bond. When one group engages, the other flanks. It was a solid plan, showing both tactical understanding and awareness of their pack strengths. Jake nodded approval. The simulation began. The Cubs moved into the urban environment with Jake watching from the control room alongside other instructors and Ambassador Krell, who had stayed on station to observe their progress. The opposing team was confident, probably overconfident. They'd heard about the wild Vulcan Cubs and expected an easy victory. They set up a defensive position around the main objective, waiting for the expected frontal assault. It never came. Caro led his group through a series of narrow alleys, avoiding the main approach. Luna's group circled wide, using the obstacles for cover. The opposing team waited, confused. Where were the wild, uncontrolled Cubs they'd heard about? Then Luna's group struck the secondary objective. The two Threxians guarding it barely had time to react before Gray and Storm hit them from two directions, while Shiva provided covering fire from above. The objective was captured in seconds. The opposing team's leader redirected resources to retake the secondary objective. That's when Caro's group hit the now weakened main objective. Fenris led the charge with his characteristic aggressive energy, but this time it was controlled, purposeful. Caro directed Storm to flank, while he took the direct approach. The simulation defenders were overwhelmed. The exercise ended in 4 minutes. The Cubs had won decisively, using tactics, teamwork, and discipline that no one expected from them. The control room was silent. Then Ambassador Krell began to laugh, a deep, booming sound. They fight like true Vulcans, not wild but fierce, not undisciplined but unpredictable. This is what they were meant to be. Commander Vexthar looked at Jake with something like awe. You didn't just train them to obey. You trained them to think. I trained them to be themselves, Jake corrected. Just the best versions of themselves. Word spread fast through the galactic community. The impossible had happened on Kepler 9 station. 6 Vulcan Cubs, declared untrainable by their own species, had been transformed into a functional combat unit by a human instructor. Within days, Jake started receiving messages from military academies across 3 sectors, all asking the same question. Could humans train their difficult cadets too? Jake sat in Commander Vexithar's office, reviewing the requests. There were a lot of them. A Kralthian military school had a group of speed-focused cadets who refused to work as a team. A Gorath training facility struggled with young warriors who only respected physical strength. Even the peaceful Cyrene had a group of telepathic students who were too connected to each other and wouldn't follow outside guidance. This is bigger than one training success, Vexthar said, his silver scales gleaming in the office light. You've revealed something about humans that nobody knew, an ability that other species lack. It's not an ability, sir, Jake replied. It's just experience. Humans lived with pack animals for thousands of years. We learned their language, their behavior. It's cultural knowledge, not a superpower. To species who lack that knowledge, it might as well be a superpower, Vexthar said. The Galactic Council wants to establish a human training program. They want to recruit humans specifically for working with pack-based species and other difficult cases. Earth's government has been contacted. This could change humanity's position in the galaxy. Jake thought about that. Humans were still new to the galactic stage, still proving themselves. Most species saw them as average in every way, not particularly strong, fast, or smart compared to specialized species. But maybe humans did have something unique, not in their physical abilities, but in their understanding of bonds, partnerships, and emotional intelligence. What about the Cubs? Jake asked. They still have months of training left. They're your responsibility until graduation, Vexithar assured him. After that, they return to their home world as full warriors. Thanks to you, they'll do so with honor. The next few weeks settled into a comfortable routine. Jake continued training the cubs, pushing them harder as they proved capable of more complex tasks. They learned advanced combat tactics, strategy, teamwork with other species, and even diplomatic protocols. But more than skills, they learned confidence and self-control. Luna became Jake's unofficial assistant, often helping demonstrate techniques to the others. Her intelligence was remarkable, and she picked up human English faster than her packmates. She and Jake would often discuss training strategies in the evenings, her insights into pack dynamics helping him refine his methods. Caro grew into his role as alpha, learning that leadership meant responsibility, not just authority. Jake spent extra time with him, teaching him how to make decisions under pressure, how to consider the well-being of his pack before his own glory. The young Vulcan took those lessons seriously. Fenris channeled his challenging nature into becoming the pack's tactical fighter, always pushing boundaries but now in productive ways. Gray and Storm developed an almost telepathic coordination, becoming a formidable team unit. Shiva's diplomatic skills made her invaluable in exercises that required negotiation or cooperation with other species. Other instructors started adopting Jake's methods with their own cadets. The Academy's entire training philosophy began to shift from dominance-based to respect-based teaching. Success rates improved across all species. Cadets who had been struggling suddenly started excelling when treated as partners rather than subordinates. Captain Helen Brooks visited Jake one evening in the training observation deck. The cubs were in their habitat below, playing before sleep. Helen had been watching the revolution Jake had started. "You know what you've done, right?" she said, standing beside him at the glass. "Trained some cubs?" Jake replied with a slight smile. "Changed how the galaxy sees humanity," Helen corrected. "We've been trying to prove we belong out here for 30 years. Trying to show we're as strong or smart or fast as other species. You've shown them something better. You've shown them we understand connection in ways they don't, that we can bridge gaps they can't." Jake watched Luna below. She was grooming Shiva's fur, a pack bonding behavior. "I just did what felt right. Treated them how they needed to be treated. That's the point. It felt right to you because of 10,000 years of human history with wolves and dogs. That knowledge is in your bones. Other species don't have that. To them, you performed magic." "It's not magic." "Close enough," Helen said. "The Galactic Council is formally requesting human trainers for their military programs. Earth's government is negotiating the terms. In a few months, there will be humans working across the galaxy as specialized trainers and handlers for pack species. You started that." Jake felt the weight of that responsibility. He'd just been trying to help 6 cubs. He hadn't meant to change humanity's role in galactic society. The graduation ceremony was held 3 months after Jake's first session with the cubs. The massive auditorium was filled with dignitaries from dozens of species, all come to witness the Vulcan cubs receive their warrior certifications. It was unprecedented. Cubs who had been written off as failures were graduating with top honors. Jake stood in the wings, wearing his dress uniform. The cubs were on stage, standing in perfect formation. They looked magnificent, their fur groomed, their bearing proud but controlled. Ambassador Krell presented each of them with the Warrior's Mark, a ceremonial scar given to all Vulcans who completed military training. When the ceremony ended, the cubs were supposed to return to the transport ship that would take them home. But before they left, Caro approached Jake. The young alpha had grown over the months, now standing as tall as Jake's shoulder. His amber eyes were serious. "You are pack," Caro said in careful English. "Always." It was the highest honor a Vulcan could give, acknowledging someone as family. Jake felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You're pack too. All of you. No matter where you go, that doesn't change." Luna stepped forward next. She had something in her paw, a small data chip. "I made recordings," she said, her English much more fluent than Caro's. everything you taught us. I will share with other Vulcans, show them your methods, maybe help other cubs who struggle like we did." Jake took the chip, moved by her thoughtfulness. "That's brilliant, Luna. You'll make an excellent teacher yourself someday." Each of the cubs said goodbye in their own way. Fenris with a playful shoulder bump that nearly knocked Jake over. Gray and Storm together, as always. Shiva with a graceful bow that showed her diplomatic training. They were leaving as warriors, but they were also leaving as individuals Jake had come to care about deeply. As their transport ship departed, Jake watched from the observation deck. Captain Helen stood beside him again. "You'll have more students soon," she said. "There's already a group of Rakeshi cubs being transferred here. They're feline-based pack hunters, been causing trouble in their training facilities. Sound familiar?" Jake smiled. "When do they arrive?" "Next week. The galaxy is learning that when you have a difficult pack species that nobody can train, you send them to a human." "I'm just one person." "For now," Helen said. "But Earth is recruiting. They're looking for people with animal handling experience, wilderness training, veterinary backgrounds, anyone who understands pack dynamics. Within a year, there will be human trainers at academies across the galaxy. You proved it works. Now others will follow." The Rakeshi cubs arrived on schedule. 6 of them, sleek and dangerous, with retractable claws and predatory instincts. Their instructors had given up after one of the cubs had climbed the walls and refused to come down for 3 days. They were considered impossible cases. Jake entered their habitat alone on the first day. The Rakeshi cubs watched him from various perches, their tails lashing, eyes calculating. They expected another frustrated instructor trying to dominate them, another failure they could mock. Instead, Jake walked to the center of the room and sat down calmly. He pulled out his water container and took a drink. Then he started talking in that same low, calm voice he'd used with the Vulcan cubs. "I know you don't know me yet," he said, "and I know you're probably expecting me to shout or threaten or try to force you to behave. I'm not going to do any of that. Instead, I'm going to tell you about a planet called Earth, and about creatures called cats, and about how humans learned to understand them over thousands of years." The Rakeshi cubs tilted their heads, interested despite themselves. One of them, a sleek female with silver fur, climbed down from her perch and approached cautiously. She sat about 10 feet away, her tail wrapped around her paws, listening. Jake smiled. It was starting again. The connection, the understanding, the building of trust. This was what humans could offer the galaxy. Not superior strength or technology, but the ability to bridge the gap between species through patience, respect, and 10,000 years of learning to speak the language of animals. In the observation deck above, Ambassador Krell watched alongside Commander Vexthar. The Vulcan had returned to witness what the human would do with a completely different species. "It's remarkable," Vexthar said. "He approaches them the same way he approached the cubs, but I can already see him adapting his methods." "Felines are different from canines." "But humans understand both," Krell replied. "They are a species of bridges. They connect with others not through power, but through understanding. That is why they will be important in the galaxy's future." Down in the habitat, a second Rakeshi cub had climbed down to listen to Jake's story. Then a third. The human continued talking in his calm voice, weaving a tale of partnership and respect, of patience and trust. He wasn't commanding them to listen. He was inviting them to choose to understand. And just like the Vulcan cubs before them, the Rakeshi cubs were making that choice. By the time the sun set on Kepler 9 station, all 6 Rakeshi cubs were sitting in a semicircle around Jake, listening to his stories of Earth. They didn't understand every word, but they understood the tone, the respect, the genuine desire to connect rather than control. Jake finished his story and stood up slowly. The cubs watched but didn't scatter. He looked at each of them, making brief eye contact, acknowledging them as individuals. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we'll start learning together. Not me teaching you, but us figuring out how to work as a team. You have instincts and abilities I can't match, but I have knowledge and understanding I can share. Together we'll be stronger than either of us alone." He walked toward the exit, not rushing, not looking back. As he reached the door, he heard a sound behind him, soft, padding feet. He glanced over his shoulder to see all 6 cubs following him at a respectful distance, curious and willing. Jake smiled and continued walking. The cubs followed. The bond was beginning, just as it had begun 10,000 years ago on Earth between humans and wolves, between humans and cats. That ancient partnership was now spreading across the stars, connecting species and building bridges in a galaxy that desperately needed them. Humanity had found its place among the stars, not as the strongest warriors or the smartest scientists or the fastest explorers, but as the species that understood bonds, that could speak the language of pack and pride, that could turn chaos into cooperation through patience and respect. And it had all started with one whispered word in a training arena: stay.